Winter doesn't just silence the world. It conceals the things that hunt in the quiet. The cold is a liar, promising peace while burying secrets alive. Lock your doors, turn up the heat, and listen closely to 3 true stories where the greatest threat wasn't the storm, but what it brought inside. The worst blizzard in a generation began not with a howl, but with a deepening silence. That's what Mark remembered most. The forecast had spoken of a major storm, but as he left the city, the flakes were gentle, almost apologetic. His usual route home was the old mountain pass, a 2-lane scar across the Rockies he'd driven 100 times. It was longer but dead straight, a relic he found comforting. As his sedan climbed, the apology ended. The gentle flakes became a furious, swirling white. The world beyond his windshield dissolved into a static roar. He white-knuckled the wheel, leaning forward as if proximity could pierce the veil. The familiar guardrails vanished. His radio, tuned to a distant station for company, surrendered first to crackling static, then to a perfect, hollow silence. He was alone in a moving cell of foggy glass and the tense rhythm of his own breathing. The only proof the road still existed was the vague, dark path his headlights carved, a tunnel that seemed to get narrower with every mile. Time stretched and compressed. Had it been 20 minutes or an hour? A deep, visceral dread, colder than the air seeping through the seals, settled in his gut. This was no longer a drive. It was a siege. He was about to make the decision to turn around, to blindly feel for a driveway or a wider shoulder, when the rear of the car gave a gentle, almost polite, sigh. It wasn't a skid. It was a surrender. The back tires found a drift the plows had missed, and the world slowly pivoted. He steered into it, pumping the brakes with a frantic, useless rhythm, feeling the terrible, weightless slide as the car drifted off the asphalt, dipped its nose, and settled with a soft, final crunch into a ditch of powder so deep it buried the headlights. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the metallic tink-tink-tink of his engine cooling. He was going nowhere. The siege was over. He was now a prisoner. Panic arrived first, sharp and electric. He slammed the gearshift, rocked the car, pressed the accelerator only to hear the tires spin a pathetic, muffled whine against the void. He fumbled for his phone. The blue light a jarring beacon in the dark cab. No service. Not a single bar. The map showed his location as a pulsating on a thin gray line, surrounded by endless blank green. He was a pixel in the wilderness. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind they tell you to take in manuals. Assessed the situation. He had half a tank of gas, a winter kit in the trunk, a blanket, a flashlight, some protein bars. He could run the engine for heat in bursts, but for how long? All night, the storm showed no sign of relenting. As the initial shock faded, a more insidious chill took hold, the chill of realization. He could not stay here. Exhaustion would come, the cold would win, and he would become just another statistic, a sad headline about a man found too late in his own car. He had to move, but to where? He strained his eyes against the passenger window, wiping a circle in the fog. Pure white, then a flicker. He blinked, thinking it a trick of the strained eye. It came again, a faint, orange-yellow pulse, up the hill and to the left. A light, a steady light, not the beam of a plow or a car, but the warm, uneven flicker of firelight through a window. The cabin. Adrenaline, sweet and potent, flooded his system. He wasn't alone out here. Gathering his kit, he bundled himself into his parka, wrapped a scarf around his face, and pushed the door open against the snow's resistance. The cold was a physical slap, stealing his breath. The wind screamed now, a high-pitched whine that erased all other sound. He aimed for where he'd seen the light and began to swim through chest-high drifts. Each step was a monumental effort, a gasp for air in the ice-laden wind. The world shrank to the next footfall, the next glimpse of that golden flicker between the thrashing pine boughs. It felt like an hour, but his watch claimed only 20 minutes had passed when he stumbled into a small clearing. The cabin was a dark hulk against the white, small and stout, with a stone chimney pumping wood smoke into the gale. The flicker came from a large, square window. No other lights were on. No vehicle was visible, just a smooth, white mound where a driveway might be. He staggered onto the covered porch, relief so profound it made his knees weak. He raised a numb fist and knocked. The sound was swallowed by the storm. He waited, knocked again, harder. Nothing. He tried the iron latch. It lifted with a heavy clunk. The oak door swung inward with a groan. "Hello!" His voice was a ragged croak, lost in the spacious dark of a single room. It was empty, but far from unused. A fire crackled merrily in a large stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on log walls. The air was rich with the smell of pine sap and something else, something savory. A cast-iron pot hung from a swing arm over the flames, simmering. A stew. He stepped inside, shutting the door on the apocalyptic wail of the wind. The sudden quiet was disorienting. He saw a worn couch, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a shelf of tattered paperbacks. It was someone's place, a hunting cabin or a retreat. But where was the owner? Perhaps they'd left before the storm, forgetting to douse the fire? But the stew, it was freshly bubbling. Maybe they were in an outhouse or checking traps. A profound sense of trespass warred with his survival instinct. He called out once more. Only the fire answered. Deciding the owner would understand, he sank onto the couch, letting the heat soak into his frozen bones. He would wait, thank them profusely, offer money for their help. As his eyes adjusted, he noticed details. The books were military thrillers. A pair of large, muddy boots sat neatly by the door. On the table, a single hunting knife lay next to a whetstone, its edge gleaming. This wasn't a forgotten cabin. Someone lived here very recently, and they were coming back. He must have dozed, the exhaustion and sudden warmth pulling him under. What woke him wasn't a sound, but the absence of one. The wind had died. In the new quiet, he heard it. The high-pitched, 2-stroke whine of snowmobiles. Not 1 but 2, maybe 3. They were approaching fast. Relief turned to sharp anxiety. He stood up, unsure whether to go to the door or stay hidden. Before he could decide, the roar of engines cut off just outside. Voices, muffled but clear, carried through the thick door. "Told you we should have checked the south run first. Quit your whining. The weather did the work for us. Trap was perfect." Boots crunched on the porch snow. Mark's blood turned to ice. Trap? Instinct screamed at him to hide. He vaulted over the back of the couch, scrambling into the darkest corner of the room behind a large woodpile stacked against the wall. He squeezed himself into the gap, pulling a tarp half over him. The door swung open. Cold air and the smell of gasoline washed in. 2 men, bulky in snowmobile suits, entered, stomping snow from their boots. "See? Cozy as you please," one said, a big man with a beard, gesturing to the fire. Guy made it easy, left his car running like a beacon. The other, younger and wiry, walked to the pot and stirred it with the knife from the table. "Smells good. Shame he didn't stay for dinner." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. The bearded man grunted, peering out the window toward the road. "Storm's letting up. We need to clear the rig and check the other spots before the county plows come through. Can't have evidence just sitting there." "What about this one? If he's in the woods?" The younger one trailed off. The bearded man turned from the window, his face grim in the firelight. "The woods finish what the cold starts. Always have. But if he's dumb enough to come knocking, well, the mountains gotta eat too." Their conversation was so casual, so utterly devoid of humanity, that Mark stopped breathing. This wasn't a rescue. His slide off the road wasn't an accident. The stew, the fire, it was all part of the set. He was the prey that had stumbled into a predator's den. The wiry man turned, his eyes scanning the room. They passed over the woodpile, paused, and moved on. "Let's grab the gear from the shed and clear the road. We'll come back for the rest later." The moment the door shut behind them, Mark moved. Fear lent him a terrible clarity. He went not to the front door, but to the small bathroom window he'd spotted. It was stuck with paint, but he shoved with all his weight, the frame splintering open with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silent cabin. He wriggled through, falling into a soft drift below. He heard the snowmobiles roar to life around the side of the cabin. He ran, not down the treacherous road, but straight up the hill behind the house, into the dense, black tree line. He ran until his lungs burned like fire, then he crawled under the low, snow-laden boughs of a giant spruce, burrowing into the natural well around its trunk. He lay there, shaking uncontrollably, as the machines buzzed back and forth on the road below. He stayed there all night. The searchers found him just after dawn, hypothermic and incoherent, babbling about hunters and traps. The police found the cabin, empty and clean. The stew pot was scrubbed bare. They found his car, winched it out. They told him he was lucky, that exposure does funny things to the mind. They wrote it up as a weather-related accident, a tragic misunderstanding. But Mark knew. He knew the shape of the trap. And he knew, with a certainty that would never thaw, that on that unplowed road, the mountain had been hungry, and he had just barely escaped the Anna and Ben inherited the A-frame cottage on the last day of autumn, a fact their grandfather's lawyer relayed with dry efficiency. The place, nestled in the dense pines of the Adirondacks, had been in the family for 60 years, but felt like a relic from a different world. Their memories of it were childhood fragments. The smell of wet wool and pine sap, the colossal stone fireplace, the musty pull-out couch where they'd slept as kids. It was a place of board games and hot chocolate, not probate and estate sales. They decided on a weekend trip just after Thanksgiving to clear it out. A somber task they approached with a mix of duty and melancholy. The drive up was a journey into monochrome. The vibrant fall foliage was a memory, stripped away to reveal a skeleton of black branches against a stubborn, gunmetal gray sky. The first flakes began as they turned off the main road, a lazy, peaceful descent that thickened by the minute. By the time Ben's SUV crunched into the gravel driveway, the world was silent and soft focus. The cottage's steep roof already lined with white. The key stuck in the lock, yielding with a groan. The air inside was frigid and still, heavy with the scent of old wood smoke and dust. They turned on the lights, the bulbs casting weak, orange pools against the dark paneling. The task was overwhelming. Every shelf held decades of accumulation. Fishing lures, mason jars, stacks of National Geographic. They worked in quiet tandem, sorting trash from donation. The only sounds the rustle of paper and the crackle of the fire Ben built in the great room hearth. It was in the cramped, freezing attic, accessed by a pull-down ladder, that Ben found it. Tucked in a water-stained cardboard box between a broken clock and a bundle of love letters, was a snow globe. It was heavier than it looked, the base made of cheap, yellowed plastic meant to resemble marble. Inside, a perfect miniature of their very own A-frame cottage sat amidst tiny porcelain pines. A figure, too small to make out details, stood near the front porch. Ben shook it, watching the white glitter swirl and settle. "Creepy," Anna said, peering over his shoulder. Grandpa had weird taste. Ben shrugged, a strange unease sluicing down his spine. He hadn't noticed it before, but the tiny cottage in the globe had a single speck of light in its window. Coincidence of the glitter, surely. He set it aside on an end table, where it watched them work for the rest of the day. The first night, the wind returned. It wasn't the blizzard scream from Mark's story, but a low, constant moan in the chimney. A sound that spoke of empty miles and deep cold. Anna, struggling to sleep on the old couch, got up for a glass of water. The main room was lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace, casting everything in pulsating red shadows. As she passed the large picture window that looked out toward the tree line, movement caught her eye. She froze. Something was standing just at the edge where the woods began, a solid, dark shape against the snow. It was man-sized but utterly still. A trick of the shadows, she told herself. A stump she hadn't noticed during the day. She blinked, and it was gone. She chalked it up to fatigue and the strange, shifting light. The next morning, under a flat, white sky, she mentioned it to Ben over instant coffee. "Probably a deer," he said, not looking up from a box of records he was sorting. "Or your imagination working overtime in Murder Cabin." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. He'd slept poorly, too. Later, as they carried bags of trash to the SUV, Anna stopped short. "Ben, look." She pointed to the snow near the corner of the house. A set of small, clear footprints, barefoot and child-sized, made a perfect circle in the otherwise pristine powder. They didn't lead to or from the woods. They simply started and ended, as if someone had materialized, walked a tight circle, and vanished. "What the hell?" Ben breathed, kneeling. The prints were delicate, the arches and toes distinct. They were fresh, made after the snow had stopped. A cold that had nothing to do with the air settled in Anna's stomach. They scanned the tree line. Nothing. Back inside, seeking normalcy, Ben's eyes fell on the snow globe. He picked it up. The white glitter had settled. The tiny A-frame sat amidst its pines. But the figurine was no longer by the porch. It had moved. It now stood just at the edge of the tiny, fabricated forest, a dark speck looking toward the cottage. His breath hitched. "Anna," he showed her. "Did you move this?" "Why would I move it?" she whispered, her face pale. They stared at the miniature, a silent consensus forming. This was no heirloom. It was a monitor. The rest of the day was spent in tense, jumpy silence. They worked faster, avoiding the picture window. As dusk bled into early night, the wind died again, leaving another oppressive quiet. Ben, trying to light the old propane lamp on the wall, cursed. "Pilot lights out." He tried a switch. The weak overhead bulb flickered, dimmed, and died with a soft pop. The power was out. The fire was their only light. In the sudden, deep twilight of the room, Anna's gaze was drawn back to the snow globe on the mantel. The firelight danced within its glass sphere. And inside, the tiny black figure had moved again. It was now halfway across the snowy clearing toward the miniature cottage. "Ben," she said, her voice a taut wire. He followed her stare. In the flickering light, they both saw it. The figure in the globe was no longer a faceless speck. It was detailed enough to see it was a child, a boy, its head tilted, its hands at its sides. And it was no longer outside. It was standing on the porch of the tiny A-frame. As they watched, frozen, a single minuscule flake of white glitter detached from the swirling mass at the top of the dome and drifted down, landing on the little porcelain porch. At that exact moment, from the very real, very dark porch outside their own door, came a sound. A soft, patient, tap-tap-tap of a small hand on wood. The sound was unmistakable. It wasn't the wind. It was a rhythm, an invitation. Tap-tap-tap. Pause. Tap-tap-tap. Anna's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. Ben's mind raced, logic warring with the undeniable evidence in his palm and at his door. The globe was ice-cold. He looked from it to the solid oak front door, deadbolt from the inside. The tiny figure in the globe was now facing the tiny door, a hand raised as if poised to knock. Perfect, horrifying reflection. "Don't answer it," Anna breathed, backing toward the fireplace, grabbing a wrought iron poker. Ben wasn't planning on it. His instinct was to destroy the link. He raised the snow globe, aiming to smash it against the stone hearth. As he tensed to throw, a change occurred within the glass. The miniature scene swirled, not with a shake, but as if the water itself had clouded. When it cleared, the scene was different. The tiny A-frame was gone. In its place was a perfect, terrifying diorama of the very room they stood in. There was the fireplace. There was the couch. And there, by the mantel, were two tiny figures. One holding a poker, one holding a snow globe. They were looking at the door. And on the other side of the tiny, painted door in the globe was a small, dark silhouette. The tap-tap-tap from their real door came again. Louder now, more insistent. The paralysis broke. Smashing it felt infinitely more dangerous. It was watching them. It was showing them it was watching. Ben lowered his arm, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had a different, desperate idea. He ran to the large picture window, ignoring Anna's hissed warning, and fumbled with the latch. It opened with a screech. Biting cold flooded in. Without a word, he hurled the snow globe, not onto the stones of the hearth, but out into the deep, consuming night. He saw its arc catch a glint of moonlight before it vanished into the blackness of the pines. He slammed the window shut and locked it. The tapping on the front door stopped instantly. The silence that followed was total, a vacuum. They stood there for an hour, maybe two, listening to the crackle of the fire and the thunder of their own blood. Nothing else came. No sound, no movement from the woods. The power stayed off. They didn't sleep. They sat with their backs to the fire, watching the doors and the window, the poker and a hatchet from the woodpile within reach. The first gray light of dawn felt like a pardon. They left with the sunrise, taking only the clothes on their backs and the paperwork for the lawyer. They didn't look back. They didn't search the snow for footprints or for a shattered globe. In the rational light of the diner 2 towns over greasy eggs, they tried to logic it away. Shared stress. Clever, animated novelty toy. A neighbor's prank. But the explanations were thin and cracked under the weight of the shared visceral memory. The synchronized tapping, the moving figure, the impossible shift of the scene inside the glass. They sold the cottage and everything in it to a development company for a fraction of its value. The paperwork was a relief. It was no longer theirs. The problem was no longer theirs. Ben never told Anna what he did later that week. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't name. He went back, not to the cottage, but to the edge of the property near the deep, frozen lake he and his grandfather had fished in as a boy. He walked out onto the ice, the wind scouring his face. And there, in a spot he remembered as the deepest, he used an ice auger to bore a hole. Into the black, frigid water he dropped a heavy rock. He didn't know why. A burial. An offering. A return to sender. Sometimes, on still winter nights when the snow falls straight down, he'll look out his city window and wonder, if you give a haunted thing a new home to reflect, does it become content? Or does it simply have a larger lake to hunt from? He never found another snow globe, but he also never shook the feeling that he hadn't gotten rid of it. He'd just given it back to the deep. For Leo, the true peace wasn't found in silence, but in the specific, hollow quiet of a frozen lake at dawn. It was a soundscape of creaking ice, the distant crack of a contracting tree, and the whisper of wind over a mile of blank, white plain. His shack on Lake Grendel was his cathedral, a weathered plywood box that held the smell of kerosene, old wool, and anticipation. This year, however, his solitude was broken. A new shack appeared 200 yards to the east, painted a stark, fresh black against the endless white. Its owner was always there, a silhouette against the rising sun or the setting dusk. His name was Elias, an old-timer with a face like a topographic map of hard winters, and he introduced himself not as a fellow fisherman, but as the lake's keeper. The title was delivered with a flat, humorless finality. "She's a hungry one, Lake Grendel," Elias said on their first encounter, his breath pluming in the frozen air. "Always has been. I just make sure the offerings are fair." Leo dismissed it as the rambling of a lonely old man. He focused on his lines, on the zen of the jig. But then the sabotage began. Not pranks, but precise, malevolent acts. He'd arrived to find his tip-ups, the flags that signaled a bite, all tripped and empty, their lines sliced clean through with a sharp blade, not broken. The hole beside his shack would be skimmed over with a perfect, new layer of ice, as if the lake itself had sealed it shut overnight. Once, he found the frozen carcass of a large perch laid neatly on his shack stoop, its eyes gone. Elias would just watch from his distance, a sentinel in black. Other regulars, the few hardy souls who braved Grendel, confirmed the strange reputation. Old Elias? Yeah, he's been here forever. Kind of a luck charm, some say. But cross him? One grizzled man said, zipping his suit. Bad juju. Things happen. Holes open up where they shouldn't. Men get forgetful. Sometimes they don't come back at all. It was superstition, the kind that grew in isolated places. Leo believed in rods, reels, and sharp augers, not lake spirits. But the feeling was undeniable. He was being warned. The lake, through its self-appointed priest, was telling him he was not welcome. The confrontation was inevitable. It happened after Leo discovered a hole. Not one of his neat, 8-inch auger holes, but a ragged, man-sized fracture in the ice halfway between his shack and Elias's. It was fresh, edges still glistening, and it hadn't been made by any tool Leo recognized. It looked like something had punched up from below, or like the ice had simply given way under a specific concentrated weight. There were no footprints leading to it. They simply began at its edge, as if someone had emerged from the water and walked away. Shaken, he marched to the black shack. Elias was outside, boiling a tin pot of coffee on a small stove. He didn't look up. "You see it, then," Elias stated. "The lake tasting the air." "Did you do that?" Leo demanded, his voice tight. "That's not a fishing hole." Elias finally turned, his eyes the color of the lake's slate-gray ice. "I don't make the holes. I observe them. I learn from them. That one's a warning. You've been greedy, taking too many of her children. She notices. That's insane. This is a public lake. I have a license." Elias's smile was a thin, cold crack. "Her laws are older than your papers. She gives and she takes. The balance must be kept. Right now, she's feeling acquisitive." He gestured with his chin toward Leo's shack. "You should leave, before she decides your lines are an insult. Before she needs a new offering to settle." The word offering hung in the air, heavier than the cold. Leo left, scoffing, but the seed was planted. That night, a late-season squall blew in, a sudden, furious thing that whited out the world. Safe in his cabin on shore, Leo watched the storm rage and thought of the black shack out on the ice. A perverse mix of concern and curiosity gripped him. Was the old fool out there? What if he needed help? Or what if, in the storm's cover, he was doing something to Leo's gear? As the wind peaked, Leo made a decision. He'd drive to the access point just to look. His headlights cut through the swirling snow, revealing an empty parking lot, except for one truck, Elias's. The man was out there. In this, a knot of dread tightened in Leo's stomach. This wasn't fishing. This was something else. He sat in his idling car, debating. The rational thing was to leave. But the image of that man-sized hole, the talk of offerings, the eerie certainty in Elias's voice, it all coalesced into a terrifying question. What did the keeper do during a storm? He turned off the engine, grabbed his heavy spotlight, and stepped into the maelstrom. Walking on the ice in a whiteout is an act of faith. The world vanishes. There is no horizon, no sky, no lake. Only a furious, granular whiteness coming from all directions. Leo used his spotlight like a blind man's cane, the beam reflecting back into his eyes, illuminating nothing but a tunnel of driving snow. He navigated by memory and the faint, ghostly glow he hoped was the shantytown ahead. The wind stole his breath and his bearings. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling, a dark shape resolved in the beam. His own shack. Past it, a fainter, taller shadow, the black shack, and there was a light on inside. Not the steady glow of a lantern, but a flickering, dancing light. Firelight, who builds a fire on a plywood floor over ice. He approached slowly, the wind masking his crunching steps. The shack's single window was fogged with condensation, but in one cleared smear he could see inside. Elias was there. He wasn't alone. 2 other men, bulky in snowmobile suits, were with him. They weren't fishing. They were looking at the wall. And on the wall, lit by the blaze of a small kerosene heater, were photographs. Dozens of them pinned in haphazard rows. Polaroids and faded prints. As Leo watched, one of the men pinned up a new one. He strained to see. The photos were of fishermen. Men on ice holding catches, standing by shacks. He recognized some of the regulars. His blood turned to slush when he realized the pattern. Below many of the photos were dates. And for a chilling number of them, the dates were followed by a simple dash. It was a timeline of disappearance. A memorial or a trophy case. Then Elias turned and pointed directly at one of the newer photos. The man with the pin turned, and the firelight fell fully on his face, and on the picture he'd just placed. It was a photo of Leo, taken from across the ice just that morning, him hauling a pike from his hole. The date was written below. No dash yet. The meaning was now horrifically clear. The offerings weren't fish. The balance the lake needed wasn't ecological. Elias wasn't a keeper. He was a shepherd, provider, and the lake, in its ancient, hungry way, was about to be fed. Leo's foot slipped on the ice with a sharp scrape. Inside the shack, all three faces snapped toward the window. Their expressions weren't surprise, but a cold, focused recognition. The time for warnings was over. The storm had delivered the offering right to them. Leo ran. He didn't head for the shore, a straight line they'd easily intercept. He ran deeper onto the lake, into the blind white, toward the place he'd seen the man-sized hole. It was a desperate, suicidal gamble, the only one he had. He heard shouts behind him, swallowed by the wind, then the roar of snowmobile engines kicking to life. The spotlight was a liability now. He killed it, plunging himself into utter, roaring blackness. He ran by feel, by memory of the lake's gentle contours, praying to a god he'd never believed in that his memory was right. The engines spread out behind him, searching. Then his left foot punched through. Not into water, but into the soft, jagged edge of the warning hole. He fell, scrambling back from the yawning black maw. He lay panting on the ice, listening. The snowmobiles circled, their sounds distorted by the storm. They were close. With the last of his courage, Leo did the only thing he could think of. He took the heavy metal spotlight and hurled it as far as he could out into the night, away from the hole. It crashed onto the ice with a loud, metallic clatter. The engine sounds immediately veered toward the noise. He listened as they converged, idled, then, after what felt like a lifetime, slowly moved away, back toward the black shack. He lay by the hole for hours, until the storm blew itself out and the first gray light revealed an empty, pristine lake. The black shack was gone, vanished as if it had never been. When he reported it, the authorities found nothing. No shack, no photos, no Elias. They told him hypothermia and isolation can create powerful hallucinations. But Leo knows what he saw. He knows the doctrine of the deep. He never returned to Lake Grendel. But on still winter nights, he'll sometimes stand by a window and watch the snow fall, and he'll wonder, when the old keeper is gone, who does the hungry lake choose as his replacement? And how long can you outrun the understanding that, one day, the ice will remember your name, and a new photo will need a final, completing dash? So there you have it. 3 stories where winter was more than a backdrop. It was an active, hungry participant. A mountain that sets traps, a relic that reflects more than a scene, and a lake with a doctrine older than any law. We tell ourselves the cold is the enemy, that survival is about fortitude against the elements. But perhaps true survival is about recognizing that in the vast, white silence, we are not the hunters. We are the guests, and some hosts have ancient, unforgiving rules. Which of these frigid tales left you the most unsettled? Was it the calculated predation of the unplowed road, where hospitality was the sharpest weapon? The eerie, possessive haunt of the snow globe, where a memory could watch you back? Or the primordial bargain of the keeper of the lake, where nature itself demands a ledger? Let me know in the comments below. Your theories and thoughts are what keep this channel's own fire burning. If these stories held you in their grip, if you felt that chill that doesn't come from any thermostat, then you're one of us. Consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. By joining us, you're not just watching videos, you're lighting a lantern in a very dark, very cold woods. Every week, we venture out together to uncover the strange, the unsettling, and the truths hidden in the shadows. You won't miss a single story, because the cold has a million stories, and we've only just begun to listen. Stay curious, but stay wary. And remember, when the snow falls heavy and the world goes quiet, it's not just the landscape that changes. It's what the silence allows to be heard. Until next time.